This is the fourth installment in a series of video blogs in which members of the Southern Africa Climate Finance Partnership reflect on their experiences of participating in and delivering the past 6 years of the program. The series seeks to explore the lessons from knowledge brokering within a community of practice for climate finance mobilization. In this video, we explore the notion of applied research as undertaken as part of the third phase of the SACFP, with support from the IDRC.
The first activity area that we focused on was applied research.
I'm not sure if there's a formal definition for applied research. Please, do you know?
I don't know, but I think that from what we've learned in this phase, we could probably frame one that makes sense for climate finance within Southern Africa. For us as the Southern African Climate Finance Partnership to bring researchers to the coalface that practitioners are experiencing is a really impactful way to enhance the region's ability to program climate finance.
Climate finance is a very dynamic and new space. Looking at academia in Southern Africa, climate finance literature, academic literature is very limited. A lot of the research that's done is done on climate change risk, but applying the academic lens to climate finance lends itself to looking at the opportunities for climate finance in the region. It would be great to expand that literature and using the idea of applied research and intertwining it into work that's already happening, that it's very relevant to what's happening today. I think that's really important. The findings of that can then feed back into what institutions and practitioners are doing on the ground, and then I guess it's a positive feedback loop.
It's a feedback loop that needs to speed up. So when you're dealing with a time-bound problem that is climate change, the way in which you speed up or grow this shallow base of climate finance-related literature is you need to expand the pool of researchers who are working on these topics. But ultimately, it's the operationalization of that knowledge and the knowledge brokering that goes with it that I think is super core and key, especially in a process that you need to have speed in order to both cover the ever-changing kind of context of what climate finance is.
For Southern Africa, where we know that we're particularly vulnerable to climate change, the urgency that we need to act is immense, and the timescales for kind of GCF project approvals are so long.
The applied research activity area set out to examine both the internal and external factors constraining or challenging the ability of these institutions to access and program climate finance, and knowledge brokering within a community of practice for the purposes of enhancing capacity and capability provided a novel research methodology, one in which challenges could be surfaced and opportunities for addressing these co-developed and tested, and the results examined collectively in a process of co-creating new knowledge.
Change is hard when you're changing in response to societal issues, scientific knowledge, which requires you to make decisions in uncertainty. It's a really, really interesting and complex process of change within an institution. This is a very new area of intersection between an organization's strategic priorities, the need to solve climate change, and then also consider gender mainstreaming. The expectation of financial institutions to do this, I would argue, in its first instance, is novel. It's not necessarily what those financial institutions set themselves up to do.
Responding to the needs expressed in the capacity needs assessment, the research agenda focused on 3 key areas: the external barriers, the need to mainstream climate finance into organizational strategy, and the mainstreaming of gender equity and social inclusion. The team undertook initial desktop research into each of these areas and constructed gap analysis tools that could be applied in a collaborative process with each of the entities in order to zoom into the core nature of the challenges they were facing.
And the gap analysis really made us understand what we had and what was required. So we got to have a very good understanding of what is needed. We didn't just draft the necessary document that were pending, but we also got capacity in terms of understanding issues, not only because they were requested by GCF, but a general understanding of good practice, basically.
For us, what was more impactful was doing a gap analysis on the gender policy. As a bank, we did develop our institutional gender policy during the time that we were going through the accreditation process. The gender policy was more of a generic document, but not speaking specifically to issues to do with climate change or climate finance issues. So that one was very critical for us as an institution. We are now mainstreaming gender-based practices in the organization as a whole, not just for climate finance issues, but across the board, throughout the different departments within the bank.
I think with the whole inclusion of the gender mainstream into our screening tools, into our frameworks, it's going to make it even more interesting to an extent where we look at not only the percentage, but all the other aspects that affect women in owning businesses. So I think it's a good initiative, and we're looking forward to implement it. It's going to be a very useful tool to use.
What we now realized as a bank is that when we are looking at issues to do with gender, we are not looking at them in the negative perspective or from a risk-based perspective. We are now looking at the issues as opportunities for us to ensure that we push through the issues by involving both men and women. Because we also appreciate that even in terms of responding to the effects of climate change, both men and women have a role to play. So we are not looking at women as victims, because I think when we started, this was the approach that would say women are the ones that are disadvantaged. But now we are also looking at them as people who can actually transform the whole discourse in terms of responding to climate change issues. And already we can actually see women taking an active role in terms of mitigation and adaptation interventions that they are pursuing.
Mainstreaming of climate finance into the bank strategy. That's one other very useful intervention that we got through the Southern African Climate Finance Partnership. We incorporated our team from the strategy department, who is responsible for the bank strategies, and they were the key staff in terms of taking us through how the bank can actually incorporate climate finance into its strategy. Yes, I would say that prior to that, there was indeed something on climate finance, climate change in the bank strategy. But I think we got a new focus, a new understanding, and we believe that our principals now have got a better understanding of what needs to be done and how that has got to be done.
It demonstrated that we need a coherent strategy. We've always been aware, ever since my involvement as champion, that we needed to do more in terms of climate change and climate finance. But what that draft report has shown us is that we need a coherent mechanism for putting everything together, first and foremost, but also having a clear plan of action in terms of what are the next steps, and possibly even quantifying what the resources required to achieve those next steps are. And in that respect, I found that draft report very, very insightful, and I'm looking forward to the discussions that we're going to be having to conclude that document.
The process certainly opened our eyes in terms of the need to mainstream, because I think what we then realize is that there are certain things that you do, particularly just for the GCF accreditation. But if you then look at the bigger and broader picture,
you'd see that some of the issues that are being spoken about are things that can strengthen the institution. For instance, gender mainstreaming. Some of the policies that you have to realign, you don't just use them for the GCF process, but it creates sustainable change in the communities in which we serve.
And I think that we could have done a better job at reflecting, or at least connecting our research, the researchers that we supported, to the capacity needs assessment.
Going forward, we could possibly look at the learnings from this phase and the links that we've now established after engaging with the community of practice, and we could try and pull on those relationships and embed that research better into the kind of gaps that they've realized at their institutions to build that narrative better and to strengthen it.
Speaking, if your project's the funding cycle of the type of support you've enjoyed has been 3 years, like, would there be additional types of researchers that you would include other than just masters and PhD students?
The one thing that we did notice that 3 years generally for a PhD, it might not just be long enough. How do we move forward from there? And the other thing is looking at maybe postdocs to commission certain pieces of knowledge products, which I think could be very useful as well.
The next area of activities that we focused on was peer-to-peer learning, and that was to address some of these emerging needs that were coming out of the capacity needs assessment.
The next video blog explores lessons from developing and delivering a formal climate finance practitioner training program.